George Gibbs. He's been with Northrop Grumman for quite a while now. How many years?
Oh, about 2.
2 years. Quite a while now.
Yeah.
Where else have you been? Because you've been doing government contracting for quite a while.
Hundreds. I've been with Northrop Grumman when it was just a Grumman.
Okay, so kind of then other places, then back.
Yep.
Okay, fair enough. And you worked on the F-14 project?
Yes, I did. The F-14D, best fighter in the world. We don't have any more of them.
Who has it now, do you know?
They
What countries? They retired it, okay. Ring laser?
They're the ones who had them.
Ring laser gyro navigation systems?
That was for a small company in New Jersey that made guidance systems. They were a guidance system company.
They weren't supposed to be attached to sharks with lasers on their head, by any
No,
chance,
that doesn't work too well. The shark knows where it is.
Okay, all right. Interoperability Test Command.
Oh, that's what I work for JITC, Joint Interoperability Test Command.
Global Information Grid.
Oh boy, doesn't that sound good?
All right. Trust me, folks, he's qualified, okay? He's qualified. Really interesting title, 21st century choice. Is it going to be fortune or privacy? George Gibbs, thanks very much.
Well, as I said, I work for Northrop Grumman. They haven't seen any of this, so when they get the times back, I may not be with them anymore. No, I tried to take all names of companies out of this. I can speak freer. And I'm not trying to down one company as much as highlight processes and things that happen in the information age that most people just don't think about. This is tough duty, isn't it? I mean, you go out, you know they Photoshop the ocean. It can't possibly be as nice as it is out there. With that said, I'll see if I can operate the remote control. Here we are. First statement, people that treasure piracy may have their treasures stolen by pirates. Treasure is a good word, we're right by the beach here. But think about it. If you're the type of person that's very private, that tends to be a little bit of introverted like most of us engineers, you try and solve the problem yourself. All right? It's just a little glitch, I'm just going to change it here. I'm just going to do that. It's a minor billing error, don't worry about it. You're the John Wayne type. You're independent, you try and fix it yourself. Well, in the information age, some of the problems are just more difficult. You as an individual or a group cannot see the whole picture. It's like being in the canyons, Malibu Canyon behind the university. You're in one valley, you don't see over the hill to the next. You have no idea what's out there. This is the age that we're in. Change. See, I'll get this right. We've all read 1984. That has left an indelible imprint on you. Whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, it's in our lexicon. We use 1984 instantly. But that sort of thinking is dead. Think about what George Orwell said. The government wants to know everything about you so the government can control your every move, allow you to move, will decide what's best for you. That was Orwellian thinking. That's dated. The government, to help you, has to have visibility into what's going on. And each individual action taken has to be compiled and moved to a larger study. Some of the things I researched, believe it or not, is epidemiology, study of disease and how it spreads. This is applicable to it. There are outcomes that you can define for a population that you can't define for an individual, because doing it on an individual basis is too complex. In physics, we have mechanics that deal with the motion of an individual particle, and we have thermodynamics when we realize we have a mole of particles, a huge number. We can't predict everything about every particle, but we can predict pressure, volume, and other things. So George, he's a nice guy, shares the same name, so he's done. All right. What's George Orwell, we fear the government. The government's going to take us over. But look at the banking crisis. The government really didn't cause that. The government didn't control where you invested money. Didn't oversee things, but didn't directly cause it. Most people today agree that it's some sort of corporate greed, taking high risk for high return, and it just didn't work. Most people fall into one of these categories, I would say. They either want corporations to do their own thing, or they want more government control, oversight. Pick which one you are. The issue is trust. And that's a very big issue. Who do you actually trust? Is it the banks that have problems? And what happens in globalization when corporations are sold? Now, we didn't sell a government yet. We're thinking of selling like Rhode Island. That's an easy statement. But we haven't sold the government. We've sold corporations. I mean, you're bought, you're sold, and that's a normal thing. But as you're bought and sold, cultures change. There's a culture mess. Now, a corporation, we like to think, is responsive to its customers. That's not quite true. Any corporation's primary responsibility is to its investors. Most of the time, they're aligned. You have a lot of happy customers, you have a lot of happy investors. It doesn't have to be. All right? And as we globalize, the culture becomes different. It's action at a distance. Give me your numbers. And when you have give me your numbers, they don't have detailed knowledge as to what's going on. Think about it. A foreign company buys your company. Now, Northrop Grumman, we haven't been bought by a foreign company. But someone buys your company. They manage at a distance. Things can go on. When you're about to be sold, try to inflate the numbers as much as possible. I mean, it just goes on. Now, what happens if you have a culture that's not innovative, not, let's say, open, who just wants the money? The safety concerns go out the window. A lot of time, yes. What happens when you have a culture that doesn't understand the products they're building? Right? Very complex products. They think it can be done in a day. Not true. So they push and they push. Things happen. Okay, statement here. Innovation is hard. It's a lot of hard work to innovate. It just doesn't happen overnight. But theft is easy. You can double and triple bill people in an information age. There's no signature now to each and every transaction. When you subscribe to a lot of services, and I'm not going to name the services, there are quite a few of them out there, you sign up to be billed once a month. They don't have to stop billing, even though you request that. They can go on for 1 or 2 months more. I mean, how do you stop? You can write an the state's attorney general, and have them turned off, but still it's 2-3 months charges. And at $10, $11 per pop, you know, it doesn't seem like you really want to invest a lot of time in something like this. As we went to credit cards, remember, there's no direct check. Something written by you for each and every transaction. As I said, it doesn't have to cancel accounts, it can double and triple bill, adds charges. And the whole key is everything is paperless. It's audible by you, but it's paperless. So that sets the stage. You know, you have, innovation takes work, and all of us as engineers or information people, we know how hard it is to do something. We all have a feel for how hard it is to build something like this. And I'm not trying to push the product one way or the other. In fact, this is my son. But even the user interface for this takes years. But if you can double and triple bill, you can make lots of money if you have a customer base of 1 or 2 million. How lucrative can something like this be? You never really realize what the numbers are until you think about it. Let's say an internet service provider bills you at the rate of $20 a month, and that's a reasonable fee. All right? You have this account for 10, 15 years. And assume you put it on a credit card and never paid it. How much at 25% are you going to, how much is that bill at the end of 15 years? And it turns out to be $40,000. It's only $3,000 in principal. $40,000 in principal and interest. Round numbers. An accountant would have a field day with that final number because I just did it on a spreadsheet, not the complex formulas. But that gives you an idea. You have now designed a cash machine that not only can make a lot of money, but this machine now robs investment from worthy investments, right? You don't have to work hard. You don't have to work now to verify your mortgages, verify that people can pay. You can just plop it into this cash machine and let it run. And that's what we've done in many ways. It's easier to do this finance bit than it is to do real work. Accountants would have a field day with that remark, but that's okay. Now let's tie it together. You now have an internet service provider and you have a credit card company. And let's say they agree on this sort of thing. It doesn't have to be at the high CEO level. It has to be two guys getting together for lunch. They both went to college together. A works for a bank and B works for an internet service provider, and say, let's do this thing. We take a little money. Both our numbers look good. We're doing a service for our people. And since it's so small, no one will ever detect it. And no one would even bother because it's only $10 a month or $20 a month. Why fight it? Well, even if someone detects it, that one person complaining just means that the Attorney General calls the internet service provider or the credit card company and says, you know, you can't look for this one case. But let's say it's not one case. Let's say it's 1,000. Let's say there's 10,000 occurring per month and something. You're really talking big bucks if you can make some sort of a line. Now with globalization, alliances like that can exist. An organization can buy a bank and later buy a company that has an internet service provider. And at least one occasion, that actually exists. So happens now they're divesting the ISP. But you had one organization that probably no one in this room would ever recognize actually have large shares in both organizations. There is no incentive any place to change. But when we put organizations and people and things together, sometimes the results are unpredictable. In this case, crime does pay. This cycle, you know, some two guys meeting over lunch to do this thing, can take 10 years to play out. When you think of it, you know, a couple years to set up the system, a couple years for the system to grow, a couple years for enough people to actually complain, and then a couple more years to actually go through the court process. And everyone can complain. It's the other guy doing it. There was at least one ISP that had at least 2 class action suits against it. One for charging for accounts that didn't, or services that didn't exist. Another one for actually controlling the modem on your computer. Once you loaded its software, it would bump out all of the competitors. Neat, isn't it? You load the software, you can't get it off. It bumps out the competitors, then bills your credit card at a higher interest. Oh, this is fantastic. This is the American way. I wish I thought of it. Again, if you have foreign investors in this, they may not actually know what's going on, but it's management at a distance and the numbers look good, so let's continue. There's another variant of this information hiding scheme. And that's if you buy a company, you know, and you buy more, and you grow bigger and bigger and bigger. This happens a lot in the defense industry. It's happened all over the place. I mean, there used to be tons of military contractors. It's now greatly reduced. But we'll look at this one company that remains nameless. And we'll look at some of its more outstanding instances. In this one, the train, we just talked about briefly, they had a 23-year-old train operator. He was the single father of, I believe, a daughter that was about 5 or 7 years old. That operator was not actually a train operator. His job description was customer service representative. So they take a customer service representative and say, you're going to be test engineer for a day. Well, put him in. He was nervous about doing this. He wasn't given a lot of training. Matter of fact, he was given so little training that they didn't tell him, when you come up to this curve, which is here, you will slow down from 50 miles an hour to 25. They didn't give him that amount of training. They also didn't have procedures on site. They also, to do this test, had to do some interesting things. They had to take off the maximum speed governor because that was part of the test. And they also had to fill the train with, I believe, 18,000 pounds of concrete. All right, they had to simulate ballast because this test was to ramp it up and then slow it down to see if the breakers would trip. So that's exactly what they did. The operator, not knowing that the curve was coming up or whatever, for whatever reason, took the turn too fast and jumped the track. Well, he would have survived that. He would have hit a concrete signal box and he probably would have walked away. But if you have 18,000 pounds of unsecured concrete, the simple physics is not very pleasant. That made the newspapers a lot. This one, same company. One of its now later model aircraft that they're selling quite a bit of, because that thing to operate makes a profit at 25% capacity. Also, the cost to operate that thing, is, when it's full, is close to your automobile. You can fly for the same cost as driving. Well, it only has one little problem. Every so often, the landing gear sort of fails. Matter of fact, in 1 year, it failed 8 times. I can't confirm the 8 number, but I confirmed at least three cases. And again, it would, on the runway like that, it would be multiple airlines, multiple regions, multiple mechanics, so it's not one mechanic causing the failure. Some of these, when the landing gear under the prop fails, it has this little problem that sections of the prop come through the passenger compartment. And the company said, don't worry, no one was killed. Globalization. Again, same thing, company grows, buys, sells. When you looked at multiple divisions of this company, Its finance division was giving mortgages to people in trailers before we had a mortgage problem, so they weren't repaying, and the same problem that you see now. They were just ahead of their time. And there were other problems. As a matter of fact, people in the newspapers were commenting every single division was having major problems. Not anymore, because they sold most of the division. Again, this thing can take 5 to 10 years to play out. You design something 2-3 years, put it through test 2 years. It goes to the field with some defective parts, and it takes about 1 or 2 years to play out. And then it goes through the legal cycle. With the plane, it's really interesting because when the landing gear fails, they offer planes at discount rates to the airline. Like, no airline would ever buy a plane at a discount rate, right? They buy more planes of the same model. And it's happened in multiple airlines. We'll go through one case study of what happened when that happened. 2 or 3 years, shoddy materials. And you can blame lots of people. As you subcontract out, you may do the design, you may subcontract parts, you may subcontract manuals, like maintenance manuals, flight manuals, all that good stuff. And you know what you do? You know, my subcontractor didn't write that manual very good. My subcontractor didn't design that landing gear very good. Oh, I knew of this defect in test that never quite got into the manuals because it would hurt my marketing pitch. That never, well, it's my subcontractor. Or you can blame pilots too. Do you know what the pay is for a starting co-pilot on one of those prop planes? Anyone want to make a guess? It's like $8 an hour. Yeah. It's why pay 30 grand for pilot school and then sit in the second seat for 18 grand a year? You can work at Walmart. And that's the type, I'm not blaming the pilot or the co-pilot, but that's a really low wage for having a lot of people's lives in your hands. Again, this cycle can take years to play out. Okay, we talked about masking failures. Again, when the planes failed in Japan, there wasn't a lot of press in Europe, but when it failed, when the landing gear on the turboprop failed, 2 times in 3 days, even the company admitted there was a problem and did examinations. Get this, this failed 3 times in 2 days. That's an incredible failure rate. Your brand name is not cherished anymore. I work for Northrop Grumman, that's a brand. But if you look at all the names that this company had for its aircraft, it's quite a few. I'm not going to name them. Matter of fact, I flew one of their aircraft coming here. I tried every way not to get it, but it's the only thing I could get. I would have known it was this company from the blurb described. I just happen to know the pedigree of all the planes they make. Again, laws differ. We're pretty rigid in the United States about our maintenance policy and other things. However, what we see happening now in the airline industry, they're under a lot of stress since 9/11 at least. So what they do is they tend to subcontract the maintenance out. And that's all right, an airline may do that. But they subcontract it out to a foreign country, like Mexico or Ecuador or something like that. There is no FAA oversight in Mexico or Ecuador. So what is the certification of the maintainers? We really don't know. And unless you put an agent in each of those maintenance places 24 hours a day, you'll never know what's going on. We go through the detailed failure rate. all right? Putting it all together, you see little bits of things. This column was presented last year at Carnegie Mellon about a year ago, just shy of a year ago. The things over here are the things added since then. You have 4 failures in under a year. 2 of the failures resulted in death. We'll go through some of them. Train crash during test. It was an automated train. It crashed. It was a signaling problem. No one was hurt. Very underreported. Bracket failure, that was highly reported. It was the Washington, D.C. train, so it didn't fail. They proactively took it out of service and did inspections. Number 3 was the worker killed, that one train, the 23-year-old worker. Those 3 occurred within a month. That's unreal. That's something, you don't have rates like that in one division of a company. 3 failures in 3 months at the maximum. I think it's like 2. 5 and 6. That was an interesting one. On this one train system, they reported having 150 defects on a train one day. And it kept reporting, kept reporting, kept reporting. They took it in, looked at the maintenance overnight, came out the next day, they still had defects. The train went out, I believe a 65-pound tire fell 25 feet from the guideway onto the parking lot of the Sahara Motel. This did not make people happy. People said, you're under-testing this. This is a little bit dangerous. Okay, I'll help you. Very nice. Smile. And we did 1 week's examination of the system. Put it back into service. Within 24 hours, a 2-pound washer fell short of the power rail, bringing down the system. People at this time were livid. Now, as a side note, when number 6 happened, I happened to be standing online waiting for George Bush he was in the election campaign. And we were waiting outside, and I was telling the vice president, look at the failure rates of this company. And the guy goes, this competitor was never supposed to do this. Well, since then, within a month, we had jets crashing. Number 7 was real interesting. Number 7 was a jet and has a certain ceiling. And normally they fly like 37,000 feet, so that's what they do. This pilot wants to join the 40,000-foot club for this one carrier. So they did. They went to 40,000 feet. A little problem was detected in test that you have to keep a certain minimum airflow through these engines or else they will seize. Never quite made it into the documentation, never quite made it into the training. So goes up to 40,000 feet, one jet fails. 5 minutes later, the second jet fails. They're now in free fall. It was commented by the NTSB. You could hear the pilots going through the manuals trying to find what to do next. They didn't make it. It took, let's see, that's 2004, it took to 2008 for the engine manufacturer to make changes on a regular maintenance percentage and to update the manuals so that that wouldn't happen again. Number 7, number 8 happened next month. 55 people killed, was in China, underreported. Number 9 got a lot of attention because an 8-year-old was killed. Now they then blame pilot error, which was true, ice on the wings, he took off anyway. However, what they don't tell you, and what was underreported, that a lot of these model aircraft have this little problem like flaps overextend a little bit. You can't prove it, but on 70% of the aircraft that they measured had this problem. Forces sometimes a plane to land. That goes 9. 10 was kind of interesting too, received national attention again. A plane in New Jersey didn't take off, flew across a road and into a warehouse. No one was killed. One driver on the road was severely hurt. The pilot, you got to look at the management scheme of this. Aircraft was sold by the manufacturer to one company, leased to a third, and the pilots were on the fourth. The pilots flew similar planes, but not the exact same model. So when they loaded the plane, they put too many, let's say, heavy people up front, and they didn't ballast the aircraft. A little subtlety of a 20-seat plane never took off, just ran across. And then these are the landing gear failures. We'll look at one thing that's very interesting. When this plane crashed here, they made a great deal on a replacement aircraft. And the airline on there is known by one name. A couple years later, that same type of aircraft, really under the same company, because the company there is actually a subdivision of 7. So really the same company buys this plane at a reduced rate, fills it with a pilot that's semi-qualified, a co-pilot that probably isn't and is sick. She didn't want to stay home because she'd have to pay the hotel bill. At $18,000, you worry about things like that. Plane crashes, blamed on the pilot and co-pilot. But look at the pattern. You buy a plane here, and that same plane that has strong relationships with that same company crashes. This one, I found one account about Disneyland. May have said, I couldn't reconfirm it, that some of the operators went out to like Denny's. This happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, so you can't confirm it. But a lot of these systems should be fail-safe. They're computerized. They're not old switchgear. Again, this one is not major. No one was hurt. They delivered the system 2 weeks later. It broke down, and about 500-600 people had to walk the tracks. If that happened in New York City, you would know about it, believe me. And this one, it's the same thing. Another jet with the same landing gear failure. It's not a pretty picture. Ooh, now we can go on to fun stuff. Medical systems. This is what the medical community can give to you. Houseisms. You can actually go out on the site and find things from, if you've ever seen the series, House is a wisecracking, smart doctor that has like, that does 100%. I mean, he manages all the cases. One houseism you could read. The internet enables rapid communication, but you have to worry about what type of communication. Who is the doctor at the other end? And as the benefit occurs, we'll try and look at that next. For those of you that have seen 2001, this is HAL. HAL is the HAL 9000 from 2001. If you've never seen the movie, the capsule summary of the movie is the computer thought he was right, and that the crew was about to abort the mission, so the computer kills the crew, or tries to. Now, I think Hal is pretty good, because Hal and I both share the same birthday. We're both born on January 12th. Can't be all bad. But that is your fear. If you think of Hal as your George Orwell, this sort of computer system that's going to control everything. But if you put in the proper medical management system, estimates are that you can save 100,000 lives per year. That's not my estimate, it comes from Wikipedia, and that's why I have Wikipedia down there. I couldn't verify it. But that number is huge. 100,000 lives could be saved a year through proper sharing of information, mainly medical files. If you find yourself in, in an emergency room, you can get access to what you're allergic to, what you're not allergic to. That's a huge potential. Okay. I apologize for that sort of graphic. I edited that very late, but it's very important to this discussion. This is the guy at Virginia Tech. He was known by his professors as being a little off. In fact, one professor refused to let him in class and would teach him on the side. He was that bad. When Virginia Tech asked for his medical records from his guidance counselor, they disappeared. They only found them like 2-3 weeks ago when they searched the guidance counselor's home. Now, if you put in a medical system, this is what you prevent. What you're doing is making a black box so that when you prescribe treatment, when you do treatment, you hold people accountable. I mean, this is a complex privacy issue, why this happened at Virginia Tech. The guy, after checking himself into a, let's say, a mental institution and checking himself out, was still allowed to buy guns. Perfectly legally. There was no interplay in the system. There was no indication that this guy should never have a gun. And because we have privacy laws, that information was never shared with people who really needed to know. We can understand what works, what doesn't work. Outbreaks. I wrote this slide before the swine flu. I based outbreaks on the bird flu a couple of years ago. But one of the things that you should know, and that came out within a few weeks, is that even though we had an outbreak in Mexico, that spread around the world. And the numbers are high. Does anyone know where the single largest outbreak of swine flu was? But you won't get it. We all think Mexico.
New York.
That's right, New York. 1,000 confirmed cases. That's because kids traveling on a Mexican vacation went back to New York. It was in a school, wasn't detected, and then started to spread. But it was New York City. As an aside, before this broke out, my son was down in Mexico with our physician, and they were, on spring break. That hits home. You can get an outbreak now worldwide. We were not able to stop that and contain it. We probably didn't think it was all that great. The consequences wasn't worth the economic impact. But we didn't. It spread, even to China. This is a nice one. This is the doctor who's a bit insane, addicted to painkillers. How? In our house system. What are we going to do with our medical system? Are we going to let the computer control? The answer is no. We want to collect, not control. The purpose of a medical information is not to control people, but to collect data. And when you collect data on a population, it is far, far different than collecting data on individuals. I can give you a good example. The example deals with New York City. I grew up there. When you look at the population in New York City, Staten Island has a very high rate of cancer. And if you come from New York City, you know that there's a refinery near Staten Island and a lot of oil tanks, so yeah, it makes sense. If you go up to the Bronx, there's a lot less incidence of cancer and a lot more instances of stroke and heart attack. So within the city, populations differ. It's hard to get that on an individual basis. But once you know how populations react, you can do things. And you can tailor the way people eat, the way people exercise, and you can do it painlessly. You can tell McDonald's to take trans fats out of its French fries, which they did in New York City. That's a law. And you can get better outcomes. rotten French fries, but better outcomes. Again, it's the instant access to medical records. That's important, especially in emergency situations. All right. People think of control, but one of our best mechanisms of oversight is our free press. We don't think of it, but it is. They're the ones who break the stories. And a lot of the newspapers, like the New York Times, and I'm not pushing their view versus anyone else's, are in severe trouble. I mean, at the edge of closing. You can also look at what happens to a paper like the New York Times when it's in financial problems and they take investments from foreign investors. That's what really happens. But if you lose one of your best monitoring mechanisms, you're in severe danger. Now, you can get a lot of things from Yahoo, you can get a lot of things from Google, but you don't get the in-depth correlated research that you get when a Nobel Prize winner is working for the New York Times. And there are Nobel Prize winners working for the New York Times as columnists. You have that level of expertise. But nowadays, with the recession, those headlines may come true. That is the number one thing to fear. You don't have a trusted, impartial mechanism of oversight. Government doesn't seem to want to do it anymore. It didn't let the banking crisis happen, even though people sort of understood what was happening. Okay. All right, conclusion, pretty easy. Don't worry about Big Brother. Actually, Big Brother can be useful. It's the lack of oversight that really gets us into trouble. And it's the lack of independent oversight. Someone who has no dog in that fight to do something. Final slide. How you perceive oversight and monitoring and government intervention is largely who you are. It's a personal decision. Some people see it as a great invasion of privacy. Other people don't. It's just the way you're brought up. And you're never, ever going to change that very easily. So, thank you. And open up to questions. Yes?
You talked about oversight and take Wikipedia as an example. Compare New York Times as a watchdog, if you will, compared to the communities, say in Wikipedia, that should have an oversight in different communities within Wikipedia. Do you think there's a chance that because newspapers, oversights, and trusted news organizations are somewhat waning, are there communities that will fill some of that void?
It could. I mean, for this paper I used Wikipedia. It was fast, easy, online. I didn't have an account with the New York Times. That's why I used it. But I didn't quite trust it. I went to Wikipedia and found 8 instances of a crash of that one model plane. But I then asked, how do I know those other instances are correct? I didn't read about them when they happened. So as a gut feel, I didn't trust them. All right? The incident where the tire fell off in the train, I followed that story as it was happening. So I had an idea of things. And I found the Wikipedia article accurate, but it was a very nice treatment of that system. It really was. It said, oh, it had problems, and it was like, it had major problems. And if you read the press, the local press of that system, they were saying, you are underfunded, you'll never get the people for this, and it was misplaced from day one.
You're going to constantly looking for credibility or vetting the source. You don't have Nobel Prize winners behind Wikipedia. Looking forward, how does community build that trust? And that's an open-ended question. You've given any thought to that?
I've given some, and what will follow after something like New York Times devises, I don't know. I don't know how people get paid for Wikipedia. Advertisements or something, I mean, and then I don't trust the advertisers, because I can say things. It's the same influence game.
Positions of color.
Very few actual paid employees for Wikipedia and all their content donations.
Okay, but you're talking apples and oranges here. Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. If you went there and you told your view of this story, and you put in opinion, it would be deleted in a second because that's not what Wikipedia is for. So I think my comment on sort of information is, you said earlier that, you know, we're looking for trusted sources, people that can synthesize a lot of different points of view and reports and give an accurate opinion of a particular event, which any newspaper, even in its greatness, has its bias. But then we heard earlier that, you know, all the new people, you know, the younger people, our kids, I guess, they only want 140 characters of text, and sometimes that's too much. And there's, like, where it's sort of going two ways, and I guess I wanted your view on this, is we have all of this expanding information. We have 9 different accounts on, you know, somewhere of this particular event. But the people today who could make sense out of this can barely make sense out of a paragraph. You know, they need a sentence. So where is that going? I mean, how are we educating young people to be able to synthesize, which to me is the most important skill needed in both the workplace and in, you know, news organizations?
My comments and my own children I've commented on, and the school, which I think is good, they're not trained to think logically. We've gone to a lot of personal skills, which is good, because I was the engineering nerd, and that has its problem. But we've gone to athletics, which is keeps them off the streets and drugs. But for logical thinking, I question it. I'm an engineer. I spent a lot of my time putting line-by-line knits together. And when the knits don't go together, the system don't work. And there were some real bad failures that, quite frankly, you can flag, people don't listen. And putting your paper, something like this together, this was years. At least just tracking things. When I say that the original report from the NTSB came out and said, well, the chief engineer was interviewed for the project, and he was asked, what about having qualified people to do the test? The chief engineer said, well, no, shrugged his shoulders and walked away. And that made it into the first draft of the report, published online. Later, don't have that.
I would actually argue that the younger generation is in many ways better at synthesizing information because they've grown up their entire lives with such this tremendous information overload that they're just being bombarded from all these different directions constantly. And so they have to learn to adapt to that overload. And I would say that actually the 140-character Twitter limit, if anything, forces them to synthesize something into a very small, concrete, here's the point.
It seems there's something missing. I mean, the hope is that connecting a lot of pieces of information and knowledge to somehow police the collusive behavior of some of the maybe corporate level or whatever that you were referring to at the beginning. I mean, some of that behavior is not a first order connection, or it's very multi-layered down. And to analyze that as or synthesize that out of the top layer of information that's for everybody, it seems to be missing key. I don't see how you could necessarily get there quickly.
With 140 characters, yeah.
With 140 characters or more communication based on commitment and ability to not
follow the, it's like CSI, you have to follow the evidence. When I originally started looking at the trends, I saw the 3 train failures, and I said, oh, this one guy, it's at fault. But when you saw the airlines fail, that's different management chain, different people entirely. And when it continued to do something else.
Well, with modern technology, you have things like mashups where you're pulling in information from a lot of different resources and looking at it all at once. So it is actually much simpler
You have
to
the
get that.
capability to deal with massively larger amounts of information and but to go beyond that first order.
I think people will they'll go beyond that first order of synthesis if it's taught with any stuff.
Well, I would argue that you're not even dealing with information. I would argue that what you're dealing with is massive amounts of data. And somebody has to take that data and do the synthesis. I would argue that now we have 2 Northrop Grumman people arguing with the Northrop Grumman person in front.
But we're from different divisions, we can do that.
We're all different divisions. Never the twain shall meet. But I would also argue that we don't know if our, I have a son who's 28. I used to get his phone bills when I paid it 10 pages. The longest phone call was 1 minute. And I would argue that we don't know whether the children of today synthesize information better because they're overexposed to massive amounts of data. And I would suggest that's a question we ought to find out, because I almost was floored when my son came to me. He was on the 7-year graduate program. He told me not to count the year that he got to work on Navy ships because he didn't work in college. But he came to me and I was floored when he said, do you have a book by Winston Churchill? I want to read a book. I couldn't believe it. But I had a book by Winston Churchill and gave it to him. I don't know if he's read it. So I don't know if we know whether the children of today who are now exposed to information overload, instant gratification, and have a very different way of viewing the world really do know how to go through a logical thought process and take massive amounts of data, convert that to information, and then assimilate that information to knowledge. I don't think we know the answer to that.
Well, actually, I've seen it in action. I've seen this over and over and over again. You get 20-somethings in a meeting, and you've got a lot of older generation people in the meeting. The 20-somethings are really frustrated. And I talk to them afterwards, because I'm sort of the British generation in my 30s. And I talk to 20-somethings afterwards, and they're frustrated, and they keep living our company, and I talk to them, why is this? Well, we waste too much time in meetings. We could get to the point and know what the actions are to take and be done in 5 minutes. And it takes these guys an hour to get there.
I would argue that's...
And they cannot, the same conclusion, the same actions, and they wouldn't be done within that first 5 minutes without having to go through the whole round.
I would argue that you have a Myers-Briggs personality difference there and move on. I yield to Rick.
Well, I have another observation. I work, some of my customers are DoD customers, and most of them are kind of like this room. The average age here is not 25. And then I work a lot in Silicon Valley, and the average age is of the engineers is around 25. And when I work in DoD meetings, it kind of goes like you're talking about. I get frustrated. I'm 50. It takes us so long to figure it out. I go into the Silicon Valley meetings, and we'll be talking about something, and these young guys are, as we're talking, they're bringing up stuff from the web to make their point. I mean, they're sitting in the meeting with iPhones and notebooks, and they're making their point punctuated with facts and data and stuff that they pull off the internet. So I would argue that the younger generation is learning how to fuse and make their point, at least the smartphones are, right? And use that big repository to be able to get at it.
But I think the point is different here. I mean, look at how many terrific failures there have been in the last 10 internet years of companies, systems. I mean, you can count them. The highway, the information highway is littered with crappy systems and poorly devised and designed software over and over and over again. I mean, just now we're kind of like, well, maybe I'll do my banking online because maybe my money won't be siphoned away or won't crash every 10 minutes or whatever. And we can all, point to our famous failures. Try to engineer a plane like we engineer our information systems. I'm in information architecture, and we do you know, we're just starting to get the idea of modeling and design and understanding all the pieces and drawing stuff out. Most of the systems that we use today, as you can tell because they crash when we reboot or whatever, are designed by young people who I don't think who don't take the time to design all of the redundant things built in. And I think you're talking about health, tying all your systems. One, I think the point was, hey, if all these systems talk to each other and we gave our information to the government or to these systems, then we could know about stuff. We could determine cancer risk and things like that. But, you know, I'm in my mid-40s and have been in computers since I was very young. And I don't trust these systems because I know how they're built. You would never fly a plane that was built like Wells Fargo Online.
There's one company that...
I mean, just to pick them out. That's a bank that I bank on.
I always find a certain complexity or safety breakpoint. If you're over a certain complexity, you really can't do it loosey-goosey because you have to trace back. Complexity and safety are the issues. A lot of these train systems aren't a lot of code. They're really not, but you haven't gone through the rigor to design the safety oversight. You haven't gotten the fail safe.
This is my Wikipedia story.
Okay.
I'm in the aerospace family. One of our engineers came to us and said, this is the told about how they had sent out parts to a subcontractor. Came back, stuff wasn't working. However they manufactured it, this material. Found out that the manufacturer had gone online, gotten the formula for the material from the Wikipedia. One of the old guys came to the library, looked up a report. He had paper like your son with the book by Winston Churchill. Found the correct formula and said, this is the way the material should be formulated in order to make our parts and meet our requirements. And so when you talk, I think it's, you know, it goes back to the trust. It's the in-depth research. Fine, if you find things online, let's go to the next step. Can you find it in reports, magazines, books? Take it so you've done due diligence. And it's not just somebody, well, we put it on the Wikipedia. I don't know if it was a number that was missing, a letter that was missing, but the formula didn't work. It cost us money because the parts were not manufactured to code properly.
One of the more interesting things about this one company, the trains and planes, when they build, oh, you'll love this, when they build these transit systems at airports, you think airport federal, right? Wrong. They finance it with bonds. And when you finance it with bonds, there's no federal money, no oversight, and no safety net. Think about it. They're designed to the standard of an amusement park.
I just had a comment going back to the generational differences, obviously from that other end, 20-somethings, and I feel like it's easy to point fingers, but as a CAM community, it would be really beneficial for us and our business teams to leverage the differences between generations rather than say, well, you know, this is their fault, this is our fault. It's this like us versus them mentality that keeps coming up. I think it would really work to our favor to figure out how we can use our strengths collectively.
That's my topic for lunch.
Okay, no problem.
And to tag on to that, by the way, it's so interesting that in this audience of people, I've heard such major assumptions made across all lines about generations. I didn't know that generations had such major likenesses for all 20-somethings and all 40-somethings and all. And so I wonder if that's something we have to think about and can help us overcome the challenge of making assumptions that all people in a particular generation trend towards particular activities or streams. Anyways, thanks very much for the presentation. It was really thought-provoking. greatly appreciate